Not too long ago, we passed the 100-day milestone in the presidency of Donald Trump. I spoke with media strategist and former political consultant Paul Robbins to get his perspective on Trump so far and whether the 100 days mark really means very much.
Yeah, it's totally arbitrary in the sense that what a presidency ends up being doesn't usually reveal itself in the first 100 days. An example would be George W. Bush, who was being criticized in the first 100 days for really not having an agenda and just, we'll go to work and see what comes up kind of presidency. And then, of course, 9/11 happened, and then he became a war president, and it changed everything. So, to hold people to that standard is probably foolish. At the same time, it does give you a flavor for how someone who campaigned is going to govern. And I think that's what people are really focused on in these first 100 days.
The president really did have a difficult start in a number of ways. Repeal, replace Obamacare. They tried to do that so fast, nothing came of it. Muslim travel ban, knocked down twice by federal courts. Sanctuary cities, hit by the federal courts much more recently. Other than getting a man through your party majority Senate onto the Supreme Court, and even that was a bit of a fight.
Right.
Not a lot to point to.
Not a lot of substance. Yeah, and this is where the campaign crashes into the governing. In the campaign, and I've done this myself, you'll do almost anything within the rules to try to win. And so, his kind of spiritual advisor politically is Steve Bannon, who takes this very extreme right position. And I think Trump learned during the campaign that Bannon was right a lot about focusing in on this, these feelings of, from white male, displaced workers, and how that could leverage him winning. So he set up all of these, very kind of bombacious, statements and rhetoric during the campaign. Here's what we're going to do. And part of the strategy was to say, day one, this is what I'm going to do, which turned into 100 days, I'll have done X, Y, and Z. Lo and behold, you go to Washington, the Republican Party split in two. You can make a case that both parties are split apart now, and that actually governing is not that easy. So going from the formula of the campaign to say the things that got votes to actually executing, very difficult to do, as we're seeing.
One of the things you said to me as we prepared for this talk was, keep in mind about Donald Trump, he doesn't come in with a lot of preconceived ideas. He's not an ideologue.
No, he's not an ideologue, so he'll go wherever the path of least resistance is. And the path of least resistance, to me, is to his base. So by the travel ban, the wall, those are things that resonated, got him elected. So he's going to stay in that space. But he doesn't, if you look at his career, there's nothing he really fundamentally believes in politically. He's been a liberal Democrat from some points of view, and now he is where he is. So he'll go wherever the path of least resistance is, which makes him difficult for the Democrats to deal with, because he's a marketer and a communicator at the baseline. So he'll send out something that might be outrageous on a Sunday on his Twitter feed, and we'll see panels for 3 days on CNN and the other networks talking about what he tweeted. He knows what he's doing with that. So he's more of a marketer than an ideologue.
He's really good at, if there's bad news, the resignation of his national security advisor, General Flynn. He pretty quickly followed that up, if I'm remembering the events correctly. If there was bad news for the Trump administration, he puts out early on a Saturday morning, I just found out Barack Obama ordered that I be wiretapped at Trump Tower.
It's so amazing.
Got us all off the story.
Right, that's a Pavlovian thing that happens over and over and over again. And what I guess would concern me, because we're kind of in this transition of this new world that we're in, how do we cover, we meaning the country, the national press and what have you, cover this stuff? So he's able to deflect and everything's sped up. Right? In the old days, wasn't that long ago, things had to gestate over 2 or 3 days. Now that's within hours. And what's good for him is that they're unwittingly kind of following the game plan in the news cycle by reacting to what he puts out there. And you're absolutely right. The Flynn thing comes up, he changes the subject. How long did that take to talk about the wiretapping? It took a few months, and we're still talking about it. So he's very good at deflecting, and I feel as though the national press is a little unwitting participant in that, and I think it's where we are.
what is it, the phrase they use now? Hold up something shiny, and we'll all kind of stare at it for a while. And so far, we've been doing that.
Yeah, and I mean, even recently, you know, he announced the change in the federal lands, so that will be discussed for a while. He's going to have he's got something to say about education, so he'll continue to change the subject. But at the same time, I think the problem for the Democrats on the other side is that he's really appealing to that base, and something like 96% in a recent poll said who had voted for him before would vote for him again. So. You know, there's all these, you know, the prognosticators out there try to find a gotcha moment for him. Like, he said this and he did this, thinking that that will unmask him. And in reality, it's only, I think, reinforcing to his base. I mean, Mark Cuban had this great phrase, which was that Trump had brought the political chemotherapy that Washington needed. And that the message found him. He didn't find the message. So I think that's what we're all kind of dealing with at this point.
You have seen him, you've noted, tacking more to the center. And you think there's a number of reasons, a number of causes for that.
Yeah, I think, well, for one thing, he wants to get reelected, but there's this internal battle, I think, between Bannon. And I think some of what Bannon suggested in the campaign worked. It doesn't necessarily work. You just mentioned some of those, the travel ban. The wall is going to be more difficult to build and get funded by the Congress. So those things become a problem politically. So if you start tacking into the center a little bit more, you could probably get a little bit more done. And to the folks that are the independents that determine the elections in our country, they're going to look and say, is he becoming a little bit more mainstream? Well, at the same time, having that kind of, you know, to some degree outrageous, you know, rail against Washington and the establishment.
How much rope does he have, do you think? And obviously it's awfully early to think about this, but for his key supporters, and they're still 90% plus with him, they've made that very clear, but he traded away a little bit of the wall to avoid a government shutdown as we sit here and speak. And even Chuck Schumer praised him about going after Canadian dairy trade, said, you know, now we're talking, this helps my district. At what point do you think, is there a tipping point, or is it just way too early to guess on that?
I think he has a lot of leeway, because if focus groups that looked at it last fall before the election found that his own supporters didn't really believe he was going to do a lot of what he said. But the fact that he said it and the way he said it was enough for them to support him. So I think he realizes that they're going to stay with him. The fact that he's on their side, more or less, I think there's wiggle room for him on those things, because we've seen it already. You know, things that haven't happened that he projected would happen, and the base still stays with him.
Paul Robbins, recovering political consultant, still working at it every day, right?
Try.
Good to have you in here with us,
Thanks,
sir.
Jim.
Sorry to drag you back into it.
I'm happy.
Thanks for coming.